How's it going, man?
What you think about meditation?
Looking sharp. Meditation? Meditation is interesting. Like, that's cool. Is that what you guys are doing here?
Yeah, we're doing. It's an ancient form of meditation known as kirtan.
Oh, cool. Okay.
What happens is kirtan is literally expressing the love we have for the divine in the heart through the discipline of music. So we're actually chanting names of God as they appear in the Vedic scriptures. Veda means knowledge.
Yeah, the Vedas, right?
Yeah, you're familiar with the Vedas.
I'm a little bit familiar with the Vedas. Now,
Where are you from originally? Puerto Rico?
No, I get that a lot, but no, I'm actually, my descent origin is Egyptian, Palestinian, I'm Arab.
Really?
Yeah. What about yourself? Dominican, okay. I got a lot of good Dominican friends. That's cool.
So our main reading is
the Gita, right?
Bhagavad Gita.
I have a copy, but I just haven't read it
As it
much.
is?
Yeah, as it is. I have the same exact one.
Really?
I haven't read this copy as much as I should have probably. But I've investigated.
You have this.
Yes, I've investigated, the kind of ideology, philosophy behind it. It's interesting, but for me, like, the thing that's always questioned me is, what is the foundation? I mean, what is like the reason as to why we should follow this book? You know what I mean? I'm kind of looking at it from a philosophical point of view. So like for me as a Muslim, I believe in the Quran because I believe it's divine, right? I believe it's the divine word of God. And I adhere to Muslim faith, by the way.
Yeah.
But from your point of view, I'm not sure, how long have you been?
4 years.
4 years. What is your means of establishing kind of like the truth behind it?
Well, ultimately it's by direct experience.
Okay.
So it's described that through this chanting process, we have an experience of the heart becoming cleansed, of the self becoming purified, and therefore our relationship with God being more established. And ultimately, what we're chanting are names of God. So we have a direct experience that God is not different than His own name.
So it's like kind of via personal experience and kind of like the spiritual outcome of it, right?
For sure.
Right.
But ultimately, Bhagavad Gita itself is spoken by Krishna, which is also, Bhagavad Gita literally means a song of the divine, the song of God, the song of Bhagavan.
Yeah, I recall that.
That's what it means. So ultimately, Krishna is instructing Arjuna on the battlefield, and he's giving him instructions how the ultimate thing is to abide by the words of God.
Sure.
And abide by His will. Because ultimately, by abide by His will, then we have nothing to worry about in this world.
But in terms of validation of the Gita, the Vedas and whatnot, so how do you go about like assessing the fact that, hey, if this is truly a divine call or divine way of life, how do you go about assessing its source? You know what I mean? Because the Gita itself, how do you know? Do you believe, maybe I'm trying to word it this way. Do you believe the Gita is the word of the divine itself?
Yeah.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Because Krishna speaks it. It says Sri Bhagavanu Vacha. Krishna spoke the Gita.
Okay, interesting. What language is that?
In Sanskrit.
Sanskrit. Oh, yeah, okay, right. Interesting.
So he spoke the Gita on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. This is a historical event. It was calculated, it was documented. So everything that happened on the battlefield is a historical fact.
How do you know that he spoke it? Is it just based on historical testimony?
That and saints that have come since then.
Okay, so ultimately it's like testimony and personal experience, right?
And also by reading the Gita, you can experience the Gita yourself.
Sure. But you and I would agree. I mean, there seems to be some level of faith, right, that you hold on to. With anything, of course.
Yeah, with anything.
But would you agree? Would you agree that there has to be both rationale and faith simultaneously?
Oh, they're very rational also.
So from a rational philosophical point of view, how do you validate it?
How do you validate it? Because then you go for the historical fact. You can see the battle of Kurukshetra is there. Kurukshetra is there, still there in India. You can go and visit the place.
And you believe that he's divine, right?
Yeah.
That he's God himself?
Yeah.
And how do you believe that?
Well, also I'm
kind of going way back here.
You can't prove that. Okay. You can't prove that. You can't prove that. You can't prove that God is there, or you can't prove that God is not there.
Of course. I mean, that's how we talk to atheists too, right?
Off of just speaking about it. Also, you have to have an experience.
You have to have a personal experience. Now, let me ask you this though, because you face a personal experience when you meditate, right? Yeah. And your chants and whatnot. But can't someone argue, just to kind of play devil's advocate, that this is something that can be experienced in the Christian worldview, in the Judaism, right? In the Islamic worldview.
For sure, because God isn't bound by religion.
And so, do you believe that if someone is or doesn't follow your way, do you hold the position that they're destined to hellfire or whatnot? Not necessarily, right? So you can attain God's way.
Sanatan Dharma means develop our love for God. Right in the beginning of the Gita, actually, it rejects religion. Religion in the sense of rubber stamp religion. Because someone can change their faith, the religion they follow. but still they can't change who their creator is. They can't change, what the ultimate destination will be.
Sure. Now, I'll tell you this, though. I've spoken to someone else who adheres very closely to the Gita and the Vedas, and they came to sort of a conclusion, a disposition that the Gita is not the word of God, but it's more so something that's believed in via faith. It's personal experience and faith, but they didn't have a way to kind of validate it. But now you're telling me that it's validated based on a historical point of view, right? A historical perspective, a battle took place and whatnot. But I still ultimately think that there seems to be, with due respect, there seems to be a little bit of a lack as to how you validate, the God that you worship.
Okay, well, you can go to the village where he was born. Vrindavan, there's 5,000 temples.
Well, let me ask you this.
There's an entire village, millions of people. So ultimately, if that's not proof enough, it's like kind of like,
you mean millions of people who worshipped him, is what you're saying?
Who still worship him to this day.
But people do that with Jesus too, right?
In that place. So Jesus was also a real figure.
Do you believe that he was divine too, a God?
Yeah.
Okay, so you believe you follow obviously polytheism, as we call it.
Polytheism. No,
monotheistic, okay. But if you're
There's
monotheistic,
one God, but he's empowered people. He's empowered Muhammad. He's empowered Jesus Christ.
As prophets or as more than
prophets.
that?
No, you can never be equal to God.
But what is your position then on Christians who worship Jesus? You know how like they literally submit to and
they can worship Jesus, but they're understanding that he isn't God himself. That's the correct understanding.
Of course.
That he's not God.
But they believe he's God, as you know. Many of them believe.
Some. Yeah, so some have a misconception.
Do you agree with that point of view?
No, I don't agree that he's God himself.
Okay, so that is more of a monotheistic point of view.
Yeah.
So you believe that he shouldn't be worshipped, but he's someone that should be...
No, he could be worshipped.
You do believe that?
But what happens is you can't worship on the same level as God. It's kind of like...
let's define worship then, because what is worship to you?
Well, worship is showing respect and putting someone on a higher platform than oneself.
Okay, but you can do that with a prophet too.
Yeah. So that's worship.
I think we should distinguish or transcend worship and following a person.
But that's what I just said. I said you can't worship it on the level of God. So there's different platforms.
Yeah.
So you can't look at this person, Jesus, and say he's God himself. We don't accept that.
Okay, so ultimately, do you believe in worshiping the creation?
The creation, but in relationship to the Creator. So you can't separate the creation from the Creator.
You cannot?
No.
Oh, see, that's where the major difference is. From the Muslim point of view, it's more so that you have to separate the creator and the creation.
Well, you can't.
Well, why do you have to do that, though? Because we believe God transcends.
For example, this is your thing. In the sense that it all comes from him. He created it. He created it. So there can never be a time where it's separate. In the sense that the sunshine, right?
Yeah.
It's shining here. So right here, this is sunlight.
Sure.
So that cannot exist. It cannot be independent in the sun.
Of course.
It cannot.
Of course.
Even though it is separate from the sun.
Yes.
It can't be independent from
Agreed.
the sun.
But
ultimately, his creation also can't be separate from him. It's a part of it.
I would hold that as a contention. I'll explain why. Because in order for God to be God, right? By definition, God has to transcend his creation. Why so? Well, if God is part of his creation, he's no longer God. Why? Because now you're taking something that is divine. Let me just finish.
You made a different statement now.
Well, I'm going to explain.
No, but you say now, we don't agree that, like you're saying, I don't agree that he's subjected to the laws of this world, but still at the same time, we can't see the world as separate from him.
We can't see the world as separate.
As separate from him. Because ultimately, he's controlling everything within this world.
He is.
So it's not separate from him.
Let me explain. I'm just from the Muslim point of view, because we have different theological, philosophical backgrounds. From the Muslim point of view, there's God, there's a creation, they're transcendent. God by nature, according to his divine attributes and names, he has to transcend the creation.
I agree. Agree.
Yeah, I know. Perhaps you do agree. Once God becomes part of the creation, he's no longer God. And therefore, whether it's, Krishna you want to call it, or Jesus, or any figure,
not that he's part of it, but it's what came from him. So in a sense, it's kind of like, okay, like your father.
Let me ask you this. Let me try to clarify. Do you believe God is all-knowing?
Yes.
All hearing, all seeing, all loving, all merciful?
This is the point you're making. The point I'm making is that you came from your father. So ultimately, you're not separate from your father.
Absolutely not, from that sense.
Yeah, you're not separate from your father. You're part of him.
No, that part is understood. I think we can agree on that part.
And then ultimately, but your father is also separate from you at the same time.
Yes.
So that's
separate entities, if you want to call it.
Yeah,
if you want to call it entities.
That's what I'm getting at.
And that's fine.
But still, you can't separate the fact that that's your father. So ultimately, we can't take the creation and just be like, okay, this is separate from God. But at the same time, it's still part of him because it came
It's
from
fine. It's fine if you look at it that way. But when it leads to a point where now you're making man equal to God, and that's where the issue is. And you don't believe in that,
no.
which is fine. I think we agree on that notion. But I think where we may disagree is that you still, figuratively speaking, you think that, or you believe that it's okay to perhaps take a creation and worship him. And that's why I was saying we need to kind of revisit the idea of
but what happens is
worship.
What happens is that you're not worshiping the material aspect of it, but God can change the.
So instead of, maybe it's
He can
semantic.
make it spiritual.
I think we have a semantical difference, if you want to call it that.
I mean, ultimately,
Because I'll tell you something.
worshiping something in relationship to God makes it spiritual. It doesn't make it material anymore.
I think the contention,
because the Lord-
the discrepancy may be the word worship. Because when we say worship, I'll tell you, from worship to me is you prostrate and bow your head to the ground and submit to God. You have a will, God has a will, and you're taking your will, and you're not now. If you're worshiping a human, you're not submitting your will to the divine. You're just submitting it to others.
But that's the thing.
And you're worshiping others.
You submit yourself to Jesus, but only to the part where he's acting for the will of the Lord.
No problem.
That's
We
what
don't
I'm
have an
talking
issue with
about.
that.
Yeah, so that's what I'm talking
But
about.
it's if you worship God solely, right? Or rather, sorry, if you worship the creation solely and you take him or her to the level of God.
We don't agree.
Okay.
And I said that in the beginning.
Which is why I think we need to distinguish in terms of semantics, prophethood and God himself. Because prophets are people who came as what? They came with an objective.
I never said they were equal.
Right.
From the beginning.
And so let me ask you this. Do you believe in prophets?
Yeah.
Prophets of God. So you believe in, obviously, Jesus, Adam.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, do you believe in Muhammad?
Yes.
Okay. Do you believe in them as prophets of God?
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. But when you say worship, I just take it a little differently in terms of how you say it.
No, but that's what I'm saying. You worship, but not on the level of God.
Right.
It's different levels of worship.
Well, I still would not use the word worship. If you want to use it, that's your discretion.
Ultimately, it is worship because you bow down. If you bow down to somebody, you worship them, but you worship them only in relationship to God. Meaning,
But you believe you should bow down to Jesus and Muhammad?
you can for sure.
That's where I would
not?
disagree.
Why not?
Because now you're taking, again, a human, and you're still putting him at a level where you shouldn't be.
But that's the thing.
It's a human being.
It's a conception. The conception is this is a servant of God, and I'm worshiping that aspect of it. I'm not worshiping him separate from God.
But you see how that's problematic, right? I mean, that's exactly how the Christians ended up worshiping Jesus. That's how, Hindus ended up worshiping animals.
Okay. So because people have a misconception
So
about it,
a lot of
doesn't mean it's
people,
wrong.
a lot of people say, "Hey, we're monotheistic." Let me explain this one point because I think this may be new to
No,
you.
I can understand your point. I understand fully what you're saying. Is that people misconstrued.
But it's
the
not just
teachings.
that. When we say monotheism, right? People believe in monotheism in different ways. Okay, so for me, I think of pure monotheism as completely separating, putting like a complete line there, a border between God who's transcendent from his creation and the creation itself. Because once you take God and make him part of the creation, it's no longer God.
But
So my point
the
is,
soul inside that person is part of
but
God.
what I'm trying to get at is, you're claiming to be monotheist, which is okay. You believe in a one God. Fine, we're also monotheists. But I think there's a difference between how people view monotheism. Like the Christians, for example, they'll say they're monotheists, but in reality, they're worshiping the triune God. Right? And then from your point of view, someone who adheres to the Vedas and the Gita, you say you're a monotheist, but then you still feel that it's okay to kind of worship, if put it in quotations for now, to worship the creation, right? And so on. But from
not
Islam,
separate from God. That's what you keep separating it. You say it's okay to worship the creation, but it's not if it's separate from God. Meaning
well,
you can't,
either way,
you can't-
so my point
you
is,
can't
even
take
if
them out.
separate
Yeah.
or together as a whole, it's irrelevant to me because once you put the word,
when you bow your head
this
down,
is what I'm trying to say, brother. I need to make one thing clear. It's me and you. We could probably understand it, but for the layman, when you use the word worship, now you're putting a term that's a little bit loose. And when you put such a loose term, you may have
you
people.
gotta explain it.
Exactly.
gotta
But
explain
the point is
Ultimately,
there have
it's
been
worship because
many people
it is something higher than ourselves.
But many people have misunderstood the idea of worship and have taken this more than what you and I know to be okay.
And people will misunderstand it even if you don't use worship. So what's
Well,
the
maybe,
difference?
maybe not. But the word
No,
worship
not
is
maybe,
loose.
Maybe not. It has been misunderstood.
The Christians have ended up.
It's not maybe,
well,
not.
Let me tell you
It
this.
has been misunderstood.
Yes,
it will
and
continue
the
to be
Christians have
misunderstood.
defaulted to worshiping
But
Jesus
ultimately, what's
because
the
of
goal?
that.
The goal is developing love of God. So if the process you're doing is developing love of God, man. all
But
power
man,
to
there's
you.
so many ways to go about it. Okay, have you looked into Islam just so we end on this note? Have you?
Take it easy.
No, it's just a question. Well, You don't want to answer further. Let's move on.